Hello, I'm Jeff Cavins. Today we're looking at the readings for the Fifth Sunday in Lent. The theme that surrounds the readings is that God is doing something new. I don't know about you, but there's been times in my life where I've done things or I've got myself in a rut and I just thought, I need something new in my life. But I know when it comes to my walk with the Lord, there are times where I do get into a rut or I'm caught in sin and I do need something new. In the Gospel of John, we see something very, very powerful, and that is a woman who is caught in adultery, and Jesus sets her free. Indeed, he does something new in her life, and I want to talk about that for just a moment. But the Old Testament reading sets the foundation for this week's reading. In Isaiah chapter 43, Isaiah speaks to Israel at a time when they needed something new. And he says, God is doing something new, but he qualifies that statement by saying, don't dwell on the past. Don't dwell on the past. Remember not the events of the past. God is doing something new. And I think that during Lent, when we're preparing ourselves for the resurrection of Jesus Christ and we are taking a look at our own hearts, sometimes we need to let go of the past and let God do that new work in our hearts. As we look at chapter 8 of John, we see that the Pharisees and the scribes brought a woman who was caught in adultery, and they brought her to Jesus and they threw her down at his feet and said, Jesus, she was caught and the law says that we should stone her. Jesus responds in sort of an odd way. He bends down on his knee and he begins to write in the earth. And then he stands up and he says, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. And then he bends back down to his knee and he writes on the earth once again. As he does this, we notice that the scribes and the Pharisees left one by one, starting with the oldest, leaving the woman completely free with Jesus. In order to understand the context of John chapter 8, where the woman is caught in adultery, we have to go back to chapter 7. And we see in chapter 7 in verse 37, on the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and proclaimed, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart shall flow rivers of living water. Now this is the day before the woman was caught in adultery, and Jesus is at the temple, and it's the last day of the great feast, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. And on that last day, there was a great water libation and offering where they would take water and they would pour it out in the temple. And it spoke of a time when the Messiah would come. And when the Messiah comes, water will flow from the temple even out into the desert. But as we read on in chapter 7, we see that not everyone accepted his message. In fact, they rejected his message. We see that there was a group of people that were sent to arrest him that day, and they went back to the authorities empty-handed. So I want you to remember a couple of themes here in order to understand what Jesus is doing with the woman caught in adultery and what he's writing in the earth. We know that it's the great feast. Water is an issue. Jesus said, he who believes in me, out of his heart shall flow rivers of living water. But there are people that rejected him. The context also involves shame. They're trying to shame the woman. So we have the Feast of Tabernacles, we have living water, a rejection of Jesus, and an attempt to shame the woman. So we go back to John chapter 8 and we ask ourselves, so what was Jesus doing when he bent down and he wrote in the earth? What do you think he was writing? He stood up, he made that claim. He who is without sin cast the first stone, went back and wrote again. Whatever he wrote caused them to disperse. I'd like to suggest to you that he wrote from Jeremiah 17. Jeremiah 17 is at a time in Israel's history where they were dealing with sin and shame. Now, Jesus' style of teaching is both simple but also very advanced. And oftentimes he would hint back to the Old Testament either by word or action, as in this case. I believe that he's hinting back. He's hinting back as to what is actually happening in this situation in freeing this woman from shame. Listen to what it says in Jeremiah 17 in verse 13. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth, for they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. So what is Jesus writing in the earth? I think he's writing the names of those who are trying to shame the woman. And I think they're from the Sanhedrin, because they're written from the oldest to the youngest in record in the temple, and it's from oldest to youngest that they are leaving. But the point is this: Jesus sets us free from shame. He gives us a new beginning. Don't look back at the past. God's doing a new thing in your life as he's freeing you from shame in the midst of Lent.